Arab millionaire. Tore a waitress's shirt. What her tattoo revealed. Left. Everyone silent. The restaurant was alive with the quiet hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the polished grace of fine dining. That calm atmosphere shifted the moment an Arab millionaire stepped in with his entourage. His presence was loud, not in sound but in the way he carried himself, a man who believed the world bent at his command. He snapped his fingers for attention, waved off the staff with impatience, and demanded the best table as if it were already his by right. Waiters scurried nervously, eager to please him, but one young black waitress moved differently. She approached with poise, balancing respect with dignity, refusing to treat him as anything more than a customer. Her calm demeanor seemed to irritate him, his pride wounded that someone dared not bow to his arrogance. He whispered to his friends, mocking her under his breath, certain that no one in the room had the courage to stand against him. But she stood tall, her silence more powerful than his words, though the tension in the air was sharp enough to cut. As the evening wore on, the millionaire grew bolder, feeding on the attention of his companions and the nervousness of the staff. When his order arrived, he sneered at the waitress, making sly remarks meant to humiliate her. Then, in a moment that stunned everyone, he reached forward, tugging at her shirt in mockery. His laughter echoed briefly until, with a swift, entitled motion, he tore it down the shoulder seam. Gasps rippled across the restaurant, glasses clattered on tables, and phones discreetly lifted to capture the scene. The waitress froze, her dignity attacked in the most public of ways, her uniform torn and her pride tested. Yet she did not crumble. She drew a deep breath, her eyes steady, her stance unshaken. And that was when the room saw what the millionaire had revealed. On her shoulder, etched in bold black ink, was a tattoo, not ornamental, but a mark of honor. The intricate insignia of a Special Forces unit glared back at the crowd, a symbol of sacrifice and service, the kind of badge that only those who had risked everything for their country could wear. Silence consumed the space. A retired colonel, seated at the back, rose instinctively to attention, saluting her in solemn respect. Whispers spread quickly, and the arrogant grin slipped from the millionaire's face as he realized the gravity of what he had done. His attempt at humiliation had instead uncovered her strength, turning the entire room against him. She adjusted her torn shirt with calm hands, her eyes locked on him, unflinching. No anger, no fear, only quiet power radiated from her presence. "Meet you," Millionaire stammered, his voice stripped of its former arrogance. He searched for excuses, but the weight of the crowd's silence crushed him. The manager came forward, not to defend the wealthy man, but to apologize profoundly to the waitress in front of everyone. Guests began to stand, clapping slowly at first, then with rising force, until the room shook with applause. Some saluted her, others bowed their heads in respect. The millionaire could no longer hide. Red with shame, he left his untouched meal and stormed out into the night, his empire of wealth powerless against the truth revealed by ink on skin. The restaurant returned to quiet, but it was a different kind of silence now, one filled with reverence. That night, no one remembered the arrogance of a rich man. They remembered the dignity of a woman who carried the spirit of a warrior. The night had begun with elegance, the restaurant glowing softly with golden lights and the quiet murmur of conversation. But everything shifted the moment an Arab millionaire and his group of companions made their entrance. His presence demanded attention, not because of charm, but because of arrogance. He moved as though the entire place belonged to him, snapping his fingers for service, waving impatiently at staff, and making loud demands that unsettled the calm. The waiters rushed nervously to accommodate his every request, but one young black waitress approached differently. She carried herself with dignity, polite but firm, giving him no more attention than she would give any other guest. This quiet strength bothered him. He whispered to his friends, mocking her professionalism, and his smug grin showed that he believed no one would dare to challenge him. The energy in the room grew tense, as though everyone sensed that something was about to happen. As the meal went on, the millionaire's attitude worsened. He complained about service, insulted the food, and made sharp remarks aimed directly at the waitress, hoping to embarrass her. She stayed composed, her face calm, her tone respectful, never once giving in to his childish taunts. That only fueled his ego. Then, at the height of his arrogance, he did something no one expected. When she placed his dish on the table, he reached out, grabbing her by the arm with mocking force. With a cruel smirk, he tugged at her shirt as if to ridicule her uniform, and then, in front of the entire restaurant, he tore it across the shoulder seam. Gasps exploded through the room. Diners froze in shock, some covering their mouths while others instinctively reached for their phones to capture what had just happened. For a moment, the waitress stood completely still, her dignity under attack, her pride tested in the harshest way possible. Yet she did not collapse. She lifted her head slowly, her eyes sharp, her posture strong, and that was when the truth revealed itself. Where the fabric had been ripped, something powerful came into view, a tattoo inked boldly across her shoulder blade. But it wasn't an ordinary design or decorative symbol. It was an insignia, sharp and unmistakable, belonging to a special forces unit, the kind that only those who had endured the trials of battle could wear. The room, which had been filled with gasps, now fell into complete silence. Recognition spread like fire through the crowd. A retired military officer sitting at a nearby table pushed back his chair and rose to his feet, standing at attention with solemn respect. The weight of that gesture was undeniable. Whispers began to ripple across the restaurant as people realized what the tattoo meant. The arrogant grin drained from the millionaire's face, his laughter dying in his throat. Suddenly, he was no longer the man in control. The waitress, though her shirt was torn, now stood as a figure of strength and honor. The tables had turned, and the man who thought he could humiliate her was instead the one humiliated, left exposed in front of everyone. The Yom room, which only moments before had been filled with gasps of shock, now stood frozen in an almost sacred silence. All eyes were fixed on the waitress as she stood with her torn shirt revealing a tattoo that spoke volumes without her needing to utter a single word. The detailed insignia of a Special Forces unit, marked with precision and weight, was more than just ink on skin. It was a badge of honor, a testament to sacrifice, discipline, and unbreakable courage. At first, a few diners only stared in confusion, but recognition began to spread like a wave across the room. Those who knew what the symbol meant exchanged glances, whispering in awe. And then, from a corner table, an older man with a sharp gaze and a dignified posture slowly rose to his feet. He was a retired colonel, someone who had once commanded soldiers and understood the value of such a mark. Without hesitation, he straightened himself and saluted her in front of everyone, his gesture carrying the weight of generations of service. The sound of cutlery on plates and murmurs died instantly, and for a heartbeat the entire restaurant held its breath. The arrogant millionaire who had moments earlier been laughing cruelly at his own display of power now found himself shrinking under the gaze of the crowd. His smug grin faltered, then disappeared entirely as the reality of what he had done began to sink in. His eyes darted around nervously, seeking validation from his companions, but even they had fallen silent, their forced laughter gone, their expressions uneasy. The waitress did not lash out, did not shout, did not crumble under the humiliation. Instead, she stood still, her torn uniform hanging loosely from her shoulder, her back straight and her gaze locked firmly on the man who had tried to demean her. There was no fear in her expression, no anger that gave him any power. There was only calm dignity, a quiet strength that radiated more loudly than any words could. In that moment, the balance of power shifted completely. Where before the millionaire had seemed untouchable, now he appeared small, stripped of the armor of arrogance that money and status had given him. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but No words came. He tried again, fumbling for excuses, but the silence of the room pressed down on him like a weight he could not carry. The waitress, still standing tall, adjusted the torn fabric with slow, deliberate movements, her every action showing she was in control. People who had been shocked only minutes ago now looked at her with newfound respect, some nodding, some whispering words of admiration. Even those who had no military knowledge understood that they were witnessing something powerful. A woman who carried within her the spirit of a warrior. And as the colonel lowered his salute, the message hung, heavy in the air. Honor could not be bought, and dignity could not be destroyed by arrogance. The air inside the restaurant was heavy, not with noise, but with a silence so thick that it seemed to press against the walls. No one laughed, no one clapped, no one dared to breathe too loudly. All eyes remained fixed on the scene unfolding. Before them, a scene that would be retold many times after that night. The millionaire, once so sure of himself, stood awkwardly at his table, his arrogance stripped away as quickly as he had torn the fabric of the waitress's uniform. He fumbled for words, stammering excuses that fell flat before they could even leave his lips. His companions shifted uncomfortably in their seats, no longer cheering him on but shrinking into the background, embarrassed to be associated with him. His wealth, his title, his false sense of power, none of it could protect him from the shame that now burned across his face. The restaurant's manager, a man who until then had kept a respectful distance from the chaos, finally stepped forward. All eyes followed him as he crossed the room, but instead of approaching the millionaire, he turned to the waitress. In front of everyone, he bowed his head and spoke words of apology, not for her actions, but for the humiliation she had been forced to endure. His voice trembled slightly, but his sincerity was clear. He placed his hand on his chest, acknowledging her with the kind of respect rarely shown in such settings. The message was undeniable. The one deserving of honor tonight was not the millionaire, but the woman who had stood so tall in the face of cruelty. At first, the silence remained, heavy and unbroken. Then, from a table near the back, a lone diner began to clap. The sound echoed in the stillness, sharp and deliberate. Another joined in, and then another, until the room filled with a rising wave of applause. It was not the casual clapping of amusement, but the steady, thunderous rhythm of respect. Some stood, their hands coming together with force. Others, with tears in their eyes, nodded in admiration. A few even saluted her, recognizing the meaning of the insignia revealed on her shoulder. The waitress did not smile, nor did she boast. She simply stood there, her torn shirt hanging loosely, her chin lifted with the quiet strength of someone who needed no validation. The millionaire could not endure it. Red-faced, his pride crushed beyond repair, he pushed back his chair with a sharp scrape against the floor and stormed out, leaving his untouched meal behind. No one stopped him, and no one cared to follow. His wealth, once a shield, had become meaningless in a room that now understood the truth. The attention was no longer on him, but on the woman who had shown what true strength looked like. As the clapping slowly faded, a new silence filled the room, not one of shock or discomfort, but of reverence. That night, the diners did not leave with stories of fine food or luxury. They left with the memory of a warrior's spirit hidden behind the uniform of a waitress, a reminder that respect can never be demanded through money or force. It must be earned through honor, and honor is something no amount of wealth can ever buy.